My daughter laughed at me, not just a small chuckle, not the way a daughter teases her father with affection, but a sharp, cold laugh that cut straight through me in front of her wealthy in-laws, and all it took was the sight of my torn suit. Before I go on, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe. What happened next will shock you. I can still see that night as though it were etched into glass, every detail sharp, every sound echoing in my chest as if it never left. The chandeliers at the Weston Estate in Savannah, Georgia, spilled golden light onto polished marble floors that gleamed like frozen rivers underfoot. The air was thick with the perfume of roses imported from somewhere far too expensive for me to imagine, and beneath it all was the steady clink of crystal glasses filled with champagne I couldn't pronounce. I walked in slowly, every step deliberate, my old brown shoes clicking faintly against the marble. They didn't shine. Their polish had long since worn away, leaving the leather cracked and dull. Each step seemed louder than the last, carrying me toward the family I once believed I belonged to. I could feel eyes on me before I had even crossed the threshold, the way one might watch a stray dog wander into a palace. My suit, it wasn't new. It wasn't even decent. I had worn it for years, patched it where I could, ironed it 100 times over to press life back into fabric that no longer held dignity. That evening, the seam along the right shoulder had split, a small tear that widened when I reached out to shake a hand. I hadn't noticed until it was too late. That's when she saw it. My daughter, Grace. Grace, my only child. She stood beside her husband's family, her delicate hand resting proudly on the arm of her smug, silk-tied spouse. She was radiant in a sapphire blue gown that shimmered with each turn of her body, her hair swept into an elegant bun that showed the fine lines of her jaw. She had every appearance of refinement, of wealth, of belonging. And when her eyes landed on me, on the torn fabric clinging to my shoulder, on my weathered shoes, on the father who had carried her through life with his bare hands, her lips curled. Then she laughed. It wasn't the laugh of a daughter seeing her father after a long time. It wasn't soft or affectionate. No, it was sharp, cutting, cruel. A series of clipped bursts, sharp enough to slice through the music, drifting from the string quartet nearby. Her laughter drew eyes. Heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Champagne glasses hovered, half lifted. "Daddy," she said, her voice pitched higher than necessary, carrying across the marble like a performer projecting on stage. "You really wore that?" Her words were light, but her tone was venom. It wasn't the question of a daughter curious about her father's choice. It was an accusation, a mockery. The words struck me harder than any slap could. Her husband's father, a man with silver hair combed back so smoothly it shone like polished steel, shifted his gaze from me to her. His cufflinks glimmered, his watch alone worth more than everything I had in my pocket. His lips pressed into something between a smirk and approval, as if amused by her boldness, by her eagerness to sever herself from me in front of his peers. I felt the blood rise in my face, hot and furious, crawling up from my chest into my ears. My hands trembled at my sides. I wanted to shrink, to vanish into the walls, to dissolve into the gleam of the chandeliers above me. But my body would not move. My jaw locked so tightly I feared my teeth would crack. "Grace," I whispered. The word nearly caught in my throat, heavy, unfamiliar, as though I hadn't said her name in years. And perhaps in truth, I hadn't. But she didn't hear me, or worse, she chose not to. She had already turned back to her new family, her laughter bubbling out again as she leaned closer to her husband's mother. Their pearls clattered softly as they shook with restrained amusement, eyes darting toward me and back. My humiliation was their entertainment. The chandeliers blurred as my eyes stung. Every glimmer of gold above seemed to twist into knives pointed downward at me. I could hear whispers ripple through the room, not loud but sharp enough to pierce. The marble floor itself seemed to carry them, bouncing them from ear to ear until they all converged on me. It was not the tear in my suit that destroyed me that night. No, it was the tear between us. For 63 years I had carried myself with dignity, even in hardship. My back bent under weight, but never broke. My hands grew calloused, but never failed. I had worked, God knows how I had worked, sacrificed meals, sacrificed comfort, gone without so she could study, so she could wear fine dresses, so she could step into rooms like this one and feel she belonged. And in one public laugh, in one cruel, deliberate moment, my daughter erased it all, as though my worth could be measured in the frayed edges of a coat. I straightened my back, though my knees trembled beneath me. I lifted the glass of water I held, cheap, untouched, lukewarm, the only thing I dared to take from the silver trays that floated through the crowd, and raised it slightly in her direction. My lips formed a smile, but it was not for her. It was for me, because in that exact moment of betrayal, with every eye in that glittering hall pressed against my skin, I felt something stir within me, something I had not felt in years. Resolve. Resolve not to beg for her respect, not to chase her affection, not to bow beneath their polished shoes. My eyes drifted from Grace and her glittering circle of strangers, strangers who wore her loyalty like a trophy, to the far end of the hall. There, half hidden behind a group of men discussing stocks I had never heard of, stood my lawyer. Samuel, a tall man, dressed in a simple but sharp black suit, his leather case tucked neatly under his arm. His hair was streaked with gray, his glasses reflecting the chandelier light, but his eyes were steady, sharp, unwavering. He had been waiting, watching, and when our gazes locked, he gave the smallest of nods. A nod no one else would notice, but one that spoke volumes. They thought the torn suit was the story that night. They thought the humiliation of an old man was the headline of their evening. But no, the real story hadn't even begun. And when it did, it would not be me who wore the shame. I remember the sound before anything else that evening. The sound of whispers. Not the gentle kind you hear in church pews when someone leans close to share a hymn book. Not the respectful murmur of people waiting in a hospital lobby, where hope and fear intertwine softly. No, these whispers cut sharper than any knife. They slithered through the chandelier's golden light, bounced off marble and glass, ricocheted from wall to wall until they landed squarely in my chest, like arrows tipped in poison. "Look at that old suit," a woman muttered, her voice muffled behind the thin veil of a champagne glass. "Isn't that her father?" Another replied, her words dripping with disbelief. "My God, he looks like he wandered in from another century." Their laughter wasn't loud. No, that would have been merciful. Instead, it was soft, secretive, the kind of laugh meant to sting harder, precisely because it was hidden. Yet it filled my ears until it drowned out everything else. The string quartet in the far corner kept playing, delicate notes of Vivaldi weaving through the room, but I only caught fragments, sharp, broken shards of sound, like glass rattling in my skull. I could not hear the music as music anymore. I heard it as mockery. My daughter's laughter still lingered in the air, too, a cruel aftertaste that clung to me like smoke. I tried to steady myself. My knees threatened to buckle beneath me, and every instinct screamed that I should leave, walk out those polished double doors, step into the humid savannah night, where cicadas hummed their eternal chorus, and no one gave a damn about the state of my coat. Out there, the world was simple. Out there, dignity was not measured by fabric or seams, but my feet were rooted to the marble floor. My pride, foolish, stubborn pride, refused to let me move. So I stood there, a statue carved from humiliation, gripping my glass of lukewarm water so tightly I could hear the faint creak of it against my skin. My pulse pounded in my ears, a drumbeat so violent I swore someone nearby must have heard it. I drew a shaky breath and forced the word past the tightness in my throat. "Grace," I said louder this time, though my voice trembled. "May I speak with you?" For a moment, just a flicker, I thought I saw something soften in her eyes, a glimmer of recognition, perhaps, or guilt, but it vanished as quickly as it came. She turned, lips pressed in that smug curve, and tilted her head just enough for the diamonds in her ears to catch the chandelier light. Beside her, Leonard, her husband, gave a polite little cough, as though to clear away the irritation of my existence. His parents, ever the picture of cold refinement, stood proudly at his side, their postures stiff, their tailored clothes whispering money with every seam. Grace looked at me and spoke with a voice laced in syrup, but her eyes were knives. "Daddy," she said, "we'll talk later. Right now is not the time." The dismissal hit me harder than her laughter had. A hush fell across the circle, brief but heavy, the kind of silence that follows a thunderclap. People shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting away as though afraid to be caught, staring at the wound she'd just opened. That was when my lawyer, Samuel Pierce, approached. He did not stride. He did not rush. He moved with calm, measured steps, his polished shoes whispering against the marble. His presence was quiet yet commanding, like a shadow that demands respect without raising its voice. A tall man with graying hair brushed neatly back, his leather case tucked securely under one arm as though it were a weapon of war. He leaned close, his breath carrying the faint scent of tobacco and peppermint, and spoke in a whisper meant only for my ears. "Are you ready?" The words sank into me like stones dropped into a well. "Ready?" The sound of them made my hands tremble harder. My throat tightened as though an invisible rope had been drawn around it. For months, long, grueling months, Samuel and I had been preparing, working in silence while Grace and her new family believed they were untouchable, climbing their golden ladder without consequence. Tonight was supposed to be the night everything changed, but betrayal cuts deeper when it comes from blood. Her laughter had broken something fragile inside me, something I hadn't realized was still vulnerable. I turned my head slightly, my lips barely moving as I muttered, "Not yet. Let them have their whispers a little longer." Samuel's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenching. For a moment I thought he might argue. Instead he gave a single, slow nod, his voice low and firm. "Very well, but don't wait too long." And just like that, he melted back into the crowd, his tall frame vanishing among tuxedos and gowns, leaving me alone once more, alone with the whispers, the laughter, and the violins that now seemed almost cruel in their beauty. I drifted toward the buffet table, hands clasped behind my back as though I were merely a guest, admiring the spread. My eyes roamed over towers of lobster tails glistening beneath lemon slices, racks of roasted lamb dripping juices onto silver trays, pyramids of strawberries arranged as though they had been painted. But the scent turned my stomach. I had eaten a simple meal of rice and beans before arriving. It had filled me enough, warmed me enough, and I had been content. And now this obscene display of excess, felt less like food and more like mockery. My stomach clenched, not from hunger, but from disgust. Behind me, the voices continued. "Poor man," someone whispered. "Doesn't he know where he is? She must be embarrassed to have him here." Another voice added, sharp with derision. "She should have bought him something new, at least for tonight." Their words were scalpels, each one slicing deeper, leaving invisible wounds that burned with shame. My ears burned so hot I thought they might burst into flame, and still the violins played on, every note like a jeer, through the noise, through the humiliation. Samuel's words echoed in my mind. "Are you ready?" The truth was, I wasn't ready. Not for their stares, not for her laughter, not for the 1,000 little daggers hidden in every whispered word. But whether I was ready or not no longer mattered. The plan was already in motion. The papers had been signed. The evidence had been sealed. All that was left was the unveiling, and when it happened, when the silence of humiliation was replaced by the roar of revelation, none of them would ever laugh again. I set my empty glass down on the white linen tablecloth. The faint clink of it against the porcelain plate beside it rang louder in my ears than the violins, louder than the whispers. My hand lingered over the glass, trembling but slowly firming, every finger curling tighter as resolve took root. If they wanted whispers tonight, I thought, then I would give them something worth whispering about, something they would never forget. You never truly know the weight of betrayal until it comes wrapped in your own child's smile. That night, after the whispers and the laughter, I stood near the buffet table, my body stiff, my eyes pretending to admire the spread of meats, the carved roast glistening under warm light, the crystal bowls filled with caviar and olives I would never touch. To anyone else I might have looked like a guest appreciating the feast, but inside me a storm raged, my heart pressed against my ribs as though it wanted out, each beat like a fist pounding from the inside. My palms were slick, not with sweat from heat, but with the cold dampness of shame. Grace had looked right through me, not the way strangers sometimes do, brushing past without care. No, she had looked through me like one looks through a window, something transparent, an object to see past, not something to see into. That was what burned. That was what split me apart. And as I stood there, frozen between the clinking glasses and the velvet laughter of the Weston estate, my mind did what minds do in moments of pain. It reached back. I thought of when she was little, a child with curls bouncing around her face, tugging at my sleeve while I worked, giggling as she begged to wear my old jacket like a cape. I would drape it around her tiny shoulders, and she would laugh as the fabric swallowed her whole, running around the yard with arms outstretched, shouting, "I'm strong like Daddy." Back then, in her eyes, I was the strongest man in the world, the kind of father who could lift mountains, who could shield her from storms. Somewhere along the years, that belief had shattered. Somewhere, the man she once worshipped had become the man she now ridiculed. But why? The question gnawed at me, raw and unrelenting. That was when Samuel reappeared at my side. "You're stalling," he said in a low, even voice. "I'm remembering," I whispered back, my eyes fixed on the buffet, though I saw nothing but shadows of the past. "Don't," he cut in, sharper this time. Then his tone softened, the way a father might scold gently. "Memories make men weak in rooms like this. Facts make them strong. Stick to the facts." Facts. Yes, facts were what had brought us here. Not nostalgia, not broken dreams, cold, immovable facts. I leaned against the buffet, my fingers brushing the linen cloth, stretched tight across the table. I let its texture ground me, pulling me out of memory and back into the weight of the present. And it struck me, like a blade slipped between the ribs. The hidden truth I had carried alone all this time. The truth Grace had never wanted to face. Grace wasn't embarrassed of me because I was poor. She was embarrassed because I was the only living reminder of what she came from. The Westons, her in-laws, were royalty in Savannah's high society. They built hospitals, their names etched into cornerstones. They bankrolled campaigns, whispered into the ears of governors and mayors. They wore their influence like second skin. Their dinners smelled of imported wines. Their conversations dripped with authority. Their very presence rearranged the room. Grace wanted to belong to them so badly that she scrubbed away every trace of her old life. She stopped visiting the neighborhood where she grew up. She avoided bringing Leonard anywhere near the cracked sidewalks and paint-chipped fences of her childhood. She even refused to let me walk her down the aisle, said it would be simpler if her husband's father escorted her instead. I remember standing outside that church, suit freshly pressed, heart full, waiting for my chance to hold her arm. And I remember her words, "It'll just look better this way, Daddy." At the time I swallowed that pain whole, told myself it was her choice, that maybe it was tradition, maybe it was modern. But the truth sat like a stone in my chest, heavy and unmovable. And now, here in this gilded room of whispers and chandeliers, that truth spilled through me like poison. Samuel must have seen it in my eyes because he leaned closer, his voice barely above the violins. "Don't let her bury you, Charles. Not after everything." Yes, everything. The lawsuit, the property rights, the documents Samuel carried like ammunition in that case under his arm. Grace believed she had silenced me years ago, when she placed those papers before me at the old oak kitchen table. Her smile had been sweet, her tone gentle, her hand warm as she guided the pen into my palm. "Daddy, it's just paperwork," she had said. "It's a tax arrangement, temporary. Leonard knows how to handle these things." I wanted to believe her. I needed to. She was my daughter. I trusted her smile. But it wasn't paperwork. It was theft. That signature cost me the lumber yard, the small business I had built with my own hands, the business that had fed her, clothed her, put her through school. With a single flourish of ink, ownership transferred into her husband's company. They told me it was a strategy. They told me it was efficient. But it was betrayal, dressed in fine words. The truth that haunted me in every sleepless night was this: Grace had betrayed me long before she laughed at my torn suit. That laugh was just the surface crack, but the betrayal had roots, deep and poisonous, stretching back years. Now Samuel and I were here to undo it. My hand drifted to the edge of the buffet, gripping the cloth so tightly the crystal glasses rattled against each other. I stared across the room at Grace. She was radiant, radiant in the glow of chandeliers, radiant in her diamond earrings, radiant in the freedom she thought she had bought by cutting me out of her life. She didn't know the storm was already rolling toward her. I closed my eyes, letting the burn of shame transform, letting the ache of memory sharpen into something else. Not grief, not humiliation. Something stronger. Resolve. When I opened them again, the truth lay before me as clear as daylight. Grace's betrayal wasn't about a torn suit, or a laugh, or the whispers of strangers. It was about her attempt to erase me, but I was not erased. Not yet. And when Samuel opened that case, when the room finally heard what had been hidden in silence for years, Grace would learn what she had forgotten. The past has claws, and sometimes it bites back. You think humiliation ends when the laughter stops, but that's a lie. Humiliation lingers. It clings to the skin the way smoke clings after a fire, settling deep into your pores, into your clothes, into the very marrow of your bones. That night in the Western estate, I felt it with every sideways glance, with every smile that wasn't truly a smile, with every delicate clink of crystal glass that rang sharper than it should have. The air was perfumed with lilacs and wine, yet all I could taste was the bitterness of being unwelcome. The chandeliers above gleamed like cages of gold, each drop of crystal reflecting my shames back at me 100-fold. The walls, covered in velvet drapes and oil paintings, seemed to lean closer, listening, judging, sealing me in. Then the quartet shifted their tune. Mozart now, quick and sharp, violins fluttering like mockingbirds swooping overhead. Every note carried a kind of glee, as though the music itself had turned against me. The rhythm didn't soothe, it taunted. It belonged to them, not to me. And at the center of it all stood Grace, my daughter, my own flesh and blood. She was radiant in that moment, bathed in the golden light of her new family, her posture sculpted by privilege, her chin lifted with entitlement. Grace was no longer a Delaney. She had molded herself into a Weston. She carried their arrogance the way she once carried her childhood laughter, effortlessly, like second nature. I realized then that to them, I wasn't her father. I was a shadow, a relic, a dusty photograph, shoved deep in the back of a drawer. Then came the moment I will never forget, the escalation of betrayal. A young man in a tailored navy suit, smooth hair, polished shoes, the kind of man who'd never lifted anything heavier than a wine bottle, leaned toward Grace. His voice was pitched low, but just loud enough to reach the circle that surrounded her. "That your father?" he asked, tilting his chin in my direction. Grace turned, and I caught that smile again. The same one she wore when she mocked my torn suit. But this time she didn't laugh. Laughter, at least, could have been dismissed as thoughtless. No, this time her words cut far deeper. "Yes," she said. Her lips curled, her eyes gleamed. Unfortunately. Unfortunately, the word wasn't shouted, but it thundered through the hall. It rang louder than the violins, louder than the idle chatter, louder even than the hammering in my own chest. It carried finality. It carried rejection. It wasn't playful. It wasn't careless. It was deliberate. It was a declaration, a denial, not of my clothes, not of my torn sleeves, but of me. I staggered where I stood. My hand shot out, gripping the edge of the buffet table, as if the marble beneath me had shifted, as though the earth itself no longer wanted me to stand tall. My throat constricted, my chest tightened, and for one fleeting second I thought, perhaps this was it. Perhaps my heart had grown weary of carrying disappointment. Perhaps it was ready to give out. But no, it wasn't my heart surrendering. It was my patience. I saw the Westons' faces then. Leonard's mother, her pearls gleaming under the chandelier, tilted her head with just the faintest smirk tugging at her lips. A queen watching a pawn be removed from the board. His father gave a small nod, a gesture that confirmed what he already believed. Grace had risen above her beginnings. She belonged to them now, cleansed of me. Even Leonard himself, the man who had sworn to love and protect her, chuckled under his breath. It wasn't loud, but it was approving, proud, like a reward for Grace's cruelty. He slipped his arm tighter around her waist, drawing her closer into the fortress of their circle. And just like that, the walls closed. They sealed her inside their kingdom of wealth and power, leaving me stranded outside in the cold. The other guests nearby pretended not to hear, but their eyes betrayed them. One woman behind her jeweled hand whispered, "Imagine raising her, only for her to—" before her husband cut her short with a sharp nudge. But I had heard enough. Unfortunately, Grace hadn't just mocked me that night. She erased me, before strangers, before the wealthy and powerful, before everyone she wanted to impress. She declared me an inconvenience, a flaw in her perfect story. The word echoed through me, over and over, each repetition sharper than the last. Unfortunately, unfortunately, unfortunately. Samuel must have felt the shift in the air, the way the room tightened around me, because he appeared again at my side. He spoke in a voice low enough that only I could hear. "Charles," he said, steady but urgent, "it's time." I clenched my fists until my nails cut into my palms. I welcomed the sting. It grounded me, reminded me that I was still here, that pain could be turned into fuel. My torn suit no longer mattered. The whispers no longer mattered. The laughter had long since ceased to matter. What mattered was this. Grace had made her choice. And in that choice, she handed me the very thing I needed to act. My gaze slid toward Samuel's case. Black leather, polished, discreet, yet heavier than iron with the weight of what it contained. Inside were the documents, the signatures, and the proof of her deception. Inside lay the weapon sharp enough to carve through the Weston's glittering evening. But for the first time in months of preparation, I wasn't thinking about property or money or the lumber yard she had stolen from me. I wasn't even thinking about the years of labor those papers represented. No, my mind burned only with the image of her lips shaping that word. Unfortunately, if they wanted me to be nothing, then I would show them exactly what nothing could do. Samuel's hand brushed against my sleeve, steady, guiding. "Are you ready now?" he asked. His eyes searched mine. And for the first time that night, I saw a reflection not of pity, but of certainty. I looked past him. Across the room, Grace laughed again, her diamonds catching the chandelier's glow, her skin radiant, her posture proud, her voice sweetened for the people who mattered most to her now. She stood safe, unshaken, untouchable, or so she believed. "Yes," I said. My voice was low, steady, stripped of hesitation. It wasn't soft. It wasn't weary. It was carved from stone itself. "Yes, I'm ready." And in that moment, humiliation died, and revenge was born. Documents don't rustle like silk, and they don't clink like champagne flutes. But when they appear in a room full of wealth and whispers, their sound is thunder. Samuel slid the leather case onto the buffet table beside me. The case landed with a soft but deliberate weight, and I swear the vibrations traveled straight through the linen, through the polished oak beneath, and into my bones. The clasp snapped open with a metallic click, a sharp, decisive sound that cut clean through the quartet's violins. My ears caught it over the music, over the murmurs, over the beating of my own heart. To the others it was a small sound. To me it was a church bell tolling, a signal. Samuel's hand moved slowly, almost ceremoniously, as he reached inside. When he drew out the thick stack of papers, the weight of them bent his wrist. Contracts, deeds, notarized statements. Every page was a scar written in ink, proof of betrayal, proof of theft, proof of how my own daughter had buried the man who raised her. "Once we begin, Charles," Samuel murmured, his voice low and heavy with warning, "there's no undoing it. They'll see her for what she is. Do you understand?" My eyes stayed locked on Grace. She was laughing again, head tilted back, diamonds throwing sparks from the chandeliers, lips curved in the kind of smile that told the world she was untouchable. She looked like royalty at that moment, and I looked like a beggar. But paper has a strange kind of power. Paper can crown kings, or burn kingdoms. "I understand," I said. My throat was dry, but my words were sharp, steady. Samuel straightened. He held the papers as though they were both shield and sword. For the first time that night, he raised his voice, not loud, but commanding. The tone of a man accustomed to courtrooms, the tone of a judge silencing noise. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began. The quartet faltered mid-note. Their bows hovered above strings, the music suspended in air as though even melody itself dared not compete with what was about to happen. A hush fell. Dozens of eyes swiveled toward us, heads tilting, conversations choking into silence. I could hear the subtle clatter of glass stems meeting tables, the faint shuffle of polished shoes against marble. Leonard's father frowned, his voice edged with irritation. "And who are you?" "Samuel Pierce," my lawyer replied. He didn't bow, didn't smile. He spoke like the room owed him their ears. "Attorney at law, and tonight I represent a man who deserves to be heard." The air changed. You could feel it pressing down, heavy, like the moment before thunder breaks. Whispers stirred like a restless wind, fluttering from guest to guest. The Weston name had been invoked, their empire challenged, and society loves nothing more than the scent of blood in the water. Grace froze. She didn't need to see the pages to know. She knew before a single word was read. Her diamonds didn't sparkle now. They glared. Her hand trembled against her champagne glass. "Daddy," she hissed, her voice sharp enough to slice through the hush, aimed only at me, but heard by everyone near enough. "What are you doing?" I stepped forward, my torn suit brushed against the linen-draped buffet, my scuffed shoes scraped across marble. But for the first time that night, I didn't shrink. For the first time, I didn't carry shame on my back. I met her eyes, what I should have done a long time ago. Samuel laid the first document on the table, his palm pressing it flat so every bold letter could be seen, even from a distance. The paper gleamed under chandelier light, the black ink stark and merciless. "This," Samuel announced, his voice ringing steady, is proof that the lumber yard, originally owned by Charles Delaney, was transferred under false pretenses to Weston & Co. The signatures were procured through deception, convincing an elderly man he was assisting with a temporary tax arrangement. The words landed like stones dropped in a still pond. Ripples of shock spread outward, faces turned, mouths parted. Leonard stiffened beside Grace, his jaw clenching tight, his father's lips thinned until they disappeared altogether, his face paling as if the blood itself had recoiled from what it heard. And Grace? She tried to smile. She tried to hold her mask, but her lips betrayed her, trembling at the edges. "That's ridiculous," she spat, her voice cracking. "Daddy, stop this right now. You don't know what you're saying." The pitying looks I had endured earlier were gone. Now there was something different. Curiosity, suspicion, judgment. The same people who had smiled at me with condescension now leaned forward, their eyes wide, hungry for scandal. Samuel wasn't finished. He pulled out a second document, heavier, thicker, its edges stamped with seals that glimmered red and gold. "And here," he continued, "is a notarized affidavit from Mr. Delaney's accountant, confirming he was never informed of the true nature of the transaction." The words rolled through the crowd like thunder. The smell of roses, of roasted lamb and wine, it all faded. The only thing I could sense was the weight of paper, crisp edges slicing through the air. Grace's voice rose, desperate now, shrill against the silence. "Daddy, please." Not here, but I didn't look away this time. I didn't bow my head. "Here," I said, my voice echoing louder than I expected, firm as stone. "Here is where it matters most." The murmurs ignited like sparks into flame. Guests turned to one another, whispering urgently, their jeweled hands covering their mouths, their fans twitching nervously. Some faces twisted with shock, others lit with a secret delight, because nothing feeds the wealthy more than scandal, so long as it isn't their own. Leonard's mother's hand trembled, her fingers loosening until her champagne glass slipped back onto the table with a dull knock. His father's nostrils flared, his chest rising and falling like a man swallowing fire. Even Leonard himself shifted back half a step, a coward's instinct to put distance between himself and the storm gathering around his wife. And Grace, my daughter, once my little girl who used to wear my jacket like a cape. She stood there stripped of her glow, The diamonds still glittered, yes, but no longer did they blind. They looked like cold stones now, glass pretending to be fire. The fortress she had built around herself cracked. The walls she thought impenetrable began to crumble. For the first time that night, it wasn't me standing alone in shame. It was her, and everyone was watching. The Weston estate had always been a monument to power, columns climbing into the black night, their marble skins washed pale by the glow of lanterns. Chandeliers shimmered above like cages of captured lightning, every crystal dripping with wealth, with authority, with the arrogance of a family who thought their walls could keep judgment out. But at that moment, the estate no longer looked untouchable. No, it seemed smaller, hollower. Its light didn't dazzle. It burned cold, like the pale shine of a blade. Inside, a storm was brewing. Not of rain or thunder, but of whispers and silences, of looks exchanged too quickly, of glasses abandoned mid-toast. It was the kind of storm that doesn't tear down roofs. It tears down reputations. I felt it first in the air, the weight of it pressing against my chest, stealing breath, turning each inhale into something jagged. Even the roses that lined the long banquet table seemed to sag in their crystal vases, their fragrance too heavy, too cloying. The music was gone. The quartet's bows lay still, trembling in the hands that held them. They didn't dare play another note. Grace's voice was the first to shatter that silence. "This is nonsense," she cried, her pitch sharp enough to slice through marble. Her words echoed off the polished walls, filling every corner. "Daddy doesn't know what he's saying. He's confused. He's confused?" I cut her off. My voice was gravel, broken but unyielding. The kind of voice life carves out of you when you've been dragged through the dirt long enough. I may be old, Grace, but I am not blind. And I am not deaf. I know what you did. The blow landed harder than I thought it would. Her hands once so steady when she reached for my arm as a child, now shook. She tried to anchor herself against Leonard, fingers gripping his sleeve, but even that anchor wavered. Samuel didn't let the silence recover. He pulled another sheet from the leather case, the papers crackle a thunderclap in the still room. He raised it high enough for the guests to glimpse the stamp, the signature, the lines of truth inked across the page. "This," he declared, "is the weather report from the very night Mr. Delaney was coerced into signing away his property. A hurricane warning was issued, power outages across Chatham County, no attorney present to review, no light in the house except a candle on the table. Convenient timing for deception, wouldn't you say?" The mention of weather, cold, factual, irrefutable, shifted the air itself. A murmur rippled across the room. You could almost hear the gears turning in their heads. I saw it in their faces, realization dawning, doubt cracking the surface of certainty, and for me, the word hurricane pulled me backward in time. I remembered that night, the rain hammering my tin roof until it sounded like war drums. The wind rattled my windows in their frames. The candles are guttering in the draft, and there she was, Grace, standing in my kitchen with a pen in her hand and a smile on her lips. "It's just for the taxes, Daddy," she'd said, her voice sweet, her eyes calm. "You trust me, don't you? Thunder outside and thunder inside me." Because, of course, I trusted her. She was my daughter, and it was that night I lost more than land. That was the night I lost her. Back in the present, the guests stirred restlessly. Some fanned themselves with napkins, though the air was chilled. Others leaned closer together, voices cutting through the silence in tight, sharp whispers. The storm wasn't outside anymore. It had entered the room. Leonard's father broke first, stepping forward with a booming voice that filled the hall. "This is absurd," he roared, his face blotched red. "You barge into my home, uninvited, and spill accusations like poison in front of my family. Have you no shame, Delaney? You disgrace yourself." I raised my eyes to him, calm, unflinching. "No," I said, my voice low, almost gentle. "I don't disgrace myself. I expose the disgrace." The words fell like an axe, heavy, final. Grace's cheeks burned crimson. She tried to meet my eyes, but her gaze kept darting to the side, toward the tall double doors, toward the escape. Her breath quickened, her chest rising and falling too fast. She wanted to mask it with anger, but beneath it was something far older, far truer. Fear. The storm had finally reached her. I stepped forward, the scuff of my shoes on polished marble echoing louder than a drum, and the crowd recoiled, subtly, almost imperceptibly. But they did, as though my ragged suit and my scarred voice carried more power than their silks and gold. The roses smelled too strong. The chandeliers flickered as if disturbed by the storm's breath. The entire room had become a battlefield, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the one bleeding. Samuel's hand hovered above the final folder, his eyes flicking toward mine, the question unspoken. Do we end this now? But no, not yet. Storms don't spend their fury all at once. They gather. They swell. They drag out the fear until people beg for it to break. I wanted Grace to feel that, to taste the dread she had planted in me. So I turned to her, softening my voice, lowering it until it was nearly a whisper, but one that carried to every corner of that silent room. "Grace, do you remember what you told me that night? While the storm rattled the windows." Her lips trembled, but no sound came. "You told me," I said, my voice steady now, stronger than it had been in years, "that you would never betray me, that no matter where you went, no matter who you became, I would always be your father first." The silence that followed was crushing. Not even a cough, not even a rustle, just the weight of 100 eyes, staring, waiting, judging. Her diamonds still glittered in the chandelier's light, but they no longer blinded anyone. Her voice, once sharp as glass, was gone. All that remained was the storm inside her, tearing down the walls she had built, leaving her exposed, trembling. And in that silence, she knew. She knew there was no escape, no hiding, no running from the storm she herself had summoned. The air crackled with anticipation. The storm had not yet struck its final blow, but it was close, very close. Fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides in the corners of the mouth, in the twitch of a hand, gripping too tightly to a wine glass, in the stiffness of a smile painted too bright. That's what I saw on Grace's face now, fear leaking through the cracks of her perfect mask. The ballroom had changed. Only moments ago it had been a hall of wealth, laughter, and polished pride. Now it was a cage. The chandeliers no longer shone. They glared. The roses were no longer decorated. They suffocated. Every guest had become a pair of eyes, every whisper a shackle, dragging against her dignity. She was trapped in the very place she had chosen to shine. Leonard shifted at her side, his hand, which had rested so proudly at her waist when they made their entrance, now loosened, as if her body burned to the touch. His gaze darted nervously to his father, searching for some sign of what to do. But the old man stood rigid, jaw clamped like stone, his fists coiled tight. His empire had been built on dominance, on control, and at this very moment, control was slipping from him like sand through his clenched fingers. I let the silence breathe, let it stretch wide enough for everyone in that gilded room to feel its weight. Silence can do more damage than shouting ever could. Silence forces a soul to confront itself. At last, Grace broke. "Daddy," she said, her voice lower now, stripped of the false confidence she had wrapped herself in earlier. "We can talk about this privately, please." Her plea wasn't for me. No. Her eyes darted desperately toward the faces staring at her, toward the whispers gnawing at her reputation. She wasn't begging for forgiveness. She was begging for the storm to pass without drenching her in its ruin. But storms don't obey command. Privately, I repeated, my words sharp enough to bite. I stepped closer, close enough for the crowd to hear every syllable. You mocked me publicly. You laughed at my torn suit in front of strangers. You called me unfortunate publicly. You took everything I built with my hands, signed it away like trash, erased me from your world, publicly. Her skin drained of color. The diamonds on her ears trembled with the shiver she couldn't hide. The crowd stirred again, louder now. Their murmurs rolled like the sea retreating, building, waiting for the crash of a wave. They weren't on her side anymore. But they weren't mine either. No, the only loyalty in that room was to spectacle, to scandal, to blood. And tonight, Grace was the one bleeding. Samuel cleared his throat. His voice was quiet, steady, cutting through the murmurs with the calm authority of a man holding destiny in his hands. From the leather case, he drew the final folder, sliding it onto the table as though it were a sacred thing. He did not open it, not yet. His fingers rested on the cover, his eyes locked on mine. "This is the moment," he whispered, his voice almost reverent. "Everything changes here." I nodded once, slow, deliberate. My knees ached beneath me. My back was fired from years of labor. But my spirit stood taller than it had in decades. I had carried humiliation for too long. Tonight, it was not mine to carry. Grace must have felt the ground shifting beneath her feet because she lunged forward. Her voice cracked, but she forced it into defiance. "If you do this, Daddy, you'll destroy me. You'll ruin everything I've built, everything I've worked for." Her words stabbed at me, not because of truth, but because of the revelation they carried. Even now, even on the edge of collapse, she still thought of it as hers. The land, the business, the family name, hers. I leaned closer, enough for her to see the fire in my tired eyes. My words dropped into the silence like stones into water. "You ruined it the night you put that pen in my hand, while the hurricane rattled my windows. You ruined it the moment you decided your future was worth more than your father." Her eyes flickered away. For the first time all evening, they glistened with something raw, something unguarded. She blinked fast, refusing to let the tears fall, but the shine was there. The silence thickened again, pressing against her chest, pressing against mine. The guests leaned in, vultures with glittering eyes, waiting, craving the final blow. The room had shifted from curiosity to complicity. They wanted the ruin. They wanted the spectacle. And Grace, she was cracking. Every second dragged her closer to the truth she had buried. Every heartbeat squeezed tighter. I didn't move. Not yet. I let her drown in anticipation, let the storm coil itself tighter around her. She needed to feel the weight I had carried for years, the dread, the waiting, the knowledge of the strike before it ever came. Because revenge. Revenge is never about the blow itself. It's about the breath before it lands, the silence before the thunder, the anticipation that tears you apart from the inside. And in that moment, as the final folder sat unopened on the table, every soul in that room leaned into the storm, waiting for me to unleash it. Revenge doesn't arrive with trumpets or banners. It doesn't march in like a conqueror. No, revenge arrives in motion, quiet, deliberate, irreversible. Samuel's hands moved first, calm, steady, precise, like a surgeon about to cut away something rotten. He reached into his briefcase and drew out a final leather-bound folder. The room was so still that even the faint rasp of the clasp snapping open felt like thunder rolling across marble. The quartet in the corner froze mid-bow, the only sound, was the faint hum of the air conditioner, trembling like the breath of someone afraid. Then Samuel placed the folder on the buffet table, its spine making a dull, final thud against polished wood. He spread the papers across the white linen cloth. The flutter of crisp pages carried through the hall, sharp and undeniable, like the wings of a great bird unfurling. I stepped closer, my shadow stretched across the table, across the documents that lay there like instruments of judgment. Above us the chandeliers gleamed in cruel brilliance, their crystals scattering the light in shards across the ink, the seals, the signatures that bore the weight of truth. Samuel's voice carried, firm and unshaking. "This," he declared, tapping the first page with his index finger, "is the reversal petition. Filed in court last week, the lumber yard, stolen under fraudulent pretenses, is being reclaimed. Ownership reverts to Charles Delaney, effective immediately." The words didn't just echo in the air, they detonated. Gasps rippled like aftershocks through the guests. Chairs scraped against the polished floor. Wine glasses clinked nervously as trembling hands lowered them back onto linen. Even the air itself seemed to constrict, as if the mansion's gilded walls were leaning inward to hear. The quartet did not dare resume. Their bows hovered in the air, suspended like unanswered prayers. Grace's lips parted, but no words came. Her chest rose and fell with shallow, frantic breaths, like a bird beating against the bars of a cage too small to escape. And then came the thunder. Leonard's father stepped forward, his booming voice striking out across the room. "This is outrageous. We will fight this in court." But Samuel didn't let him finish. He cut through the man's bluster with a single, razor-sharp line. "It is already in court, filed, stamped, and docketed. Tonight isn't about litigation. Tonight is about the truth." The silence that followed was heavier than any gavel. I turned, slowly, so my gaze swept across every jeweled guest, every polished face, every whispering mouth that had ridiculed me. My voice was steady, though inside my chest, my heart hammered like a drum of war. "You laughed at my torn suit," I said, my tone low, deliberate. "You whispered behind your hands. You called me unfortunate, a relic, a man who had lost everything." The weight of my words gathered strength with each syllable. My gaze locked on Grace. Her eyes, once proud and defiant, now shimmered, not with triumph, but with terror. "But what you forgot," I continued, my voice slowing to a measured cadence, "is that a torn suit can be mended. A broken man can rise, and when he does, he doesn't just stand. He takes back what is his." Another wave of gasps rolled through the room. The whispers grew sharper, cutting through the hush like blades in the dark. Reversal petition. He tricked them. She betrayed her own father. The social ground shifted beneath us. The glittering Westons, once the untouchable center of wealth and elegance, now stood exposed under the harsh spotlight of truth. Their empire, built on deceit, dimmed with every murmured word that passed from guest to guest. Grace stumbled forward a single step, her heels clicking weakly on marble. Her voice cracked, fragile and desperate. "Daddy, please, don't do this. We can fix this, together." Time slowed. The plea struck me deeper than her mocking laughter ever had. In that flicker I saw her, not as the polished woman cloaked in diamonds and pride, but as the little girl who once pressed wildflowers between the pages of my old Bible. The girl who cried when her knees scraped raw. The girl who whispered through tears and promises, "I'll never leave you, Daddy." For a heartbeat I faltered. Memory clawed at me. But revenge. Revenge is a river. Once it flows, you cannot stop it halfway. To dam it now would drown me. "You had your chance, Grace," I said softly. The room strained to hear. And you chose them, I nodded to Samuel. With a quiet, deliberate gesture, he lifted the final page, court-stamped, bold, undeniable, and laid it atop the stack. The paper seemed to land with the weight of a hammer striking stone. The Westons' faces drained of all color. Leonard's grip on Grace slackened until his fingers slid away as though her skin burned. The fortress she had spent years building, every lie, every betrayal, every smirk at my expense, collapsed in an instant. And then the whispers became a storm. No longer hushed, no longer restrained. Guests leaned to one another, pointing, murmuring, their voices rising in scandalous chorus. She stole from him. Fraud in the family business? Did you hear what he said about the hurricane night? Grace spun in circles, her diamonds flashing like frantic beacons in the storm, her eyes darting desperately from face to face. But no one stepped forward. Not Leonard, not his parents, not one single guest. The fortress was gone. The crowd that once embraced her now turned its gaze like a pack of wolves circling prey. I drew myself taller than I had in years. My torn suit still hung loose on my shoulders, but my dignity was ironclad, stitched with the threads of justice. Revenge had been executed, not with fists, not with fury, but with paper, with truth, with silence, sharpened into thunder. And as Grace crumbled before the world she had chosen, her jewels rattling against her trembling collarbones, I knew one thing with a certainty that cut sharper than any blade. The storm was only beginning. The storm inside that ballroom didn't end when Samuel closed the folder. No. If anything, that was when it truly began. Voices rose in jagged bursts, like glass splintering under pressure. Some guests pressed toward the gilded double doors, desperate to slip away before scandal could stain their silks and tailored suits. Others leaned in closer, their curiosity outweighing their dignity, eyes hungry for details the way buzzards circle a carcass. The quartet sat frozen in their chairs, instruments resting silent across their laps. Their bows dangled like broken wings, strings left unstruck, as though even music itself refused to touch the chaos. The chandeliers still blazed overhead, scattering cruel fragments of light across the marble floor, but no shimmer could mask the ugliness that had been unearthed. And there, at the center of it all, was Grace, my daughter, my own flesh and blood. Her hands shook as she reached for a glass of champagne. The stem rattled against her fingers, the liquid trembling inside like it too, fearing what was unfolding. When she tried to lift it, her grip faltered. The crystal flute slipped from her hand. The sharp crack of glass striking marble cut through every voice. Shards scattered across the floor, glittering like fallen stars. The sound silenced the room for a suspended breath, long enough for every guest to turn and see her unravel. "Daddy, please," she whispered again. Her words barely touched the air, yet they struck my chest like a hammer. I heard her. I always heard her. Even when she mocked me, even when she stood with her back to me, her voice had always pierced deeper than anyone else's. Leonard edged away from her, his jaw locked, lips thin with silent rage. His father's earlier thunder, so full of bluster and indignation, had reduced to mutters with the cluster of lawyers huddled around him. Their hands flailed across the documents Samuel had laid down, but the strength had left their voices. Power does not survive in panic. And the crowd? The crowd no longer looked at Grace as a daughter, or as a wife, or as a Weston. They looked at her as a scandal, as a liability, as a downfall waiting to be carved into headlines. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I stood still, my torn suit brushing against my legs, the loose threads tickling my skin, a reminder of where this had all begun. But inside, reflection struck like a wave. Revenge always tastes different once it's swallowed. Bitterer. Heavier. I thought of the countless nights I'd lain awake, eyes fixed on a ceiling swallowed by shadows, wondering if exposing her would destroy me as much as it destroyed her. I thought of the little girl who once brought me wildflowers, who begged me to braid her doll's hair, who left drawings on the lumber office desk, sketches of us, signed with crooked hearts. And then I remembered the hurricane night, the storm winds howling outside, my business drowning inside. I remembered the papers sliding across the desk, Leonard's father's pen striking like lightning, forging away my name. I remembered Grace sitting there, silent, eyes fixed anywhere but mine. She could have spoken. She could have stopped them. She didn't. She let me drown so she could rise. And now she stood stripped bare before everyone. Her crown slipped. Her allies are receding. Her husband, my son-in-law, looked at her not as his partner, but as a costly mistake. Samuel leaned toward me, his voice low, calm, as though he were simply concluding a business deal. It's done. They'll fight, but they've already lost. His tone was steady, yet his eyes betrayed a flicker of awe, perhaps even unease. He was a man used to battles in courtrooms, but this was war in a ballroom, waged with bloodlines and betrayal. The whispers rose again, swelling into a storm tide. Imagine betraying your own father. I heard she knew about the forged signatures. Leonard will leave her. You watch. Their words sliced sharper than steel, but they didn't pierce me. They pierced her, each whisper another cut, each rumor another lash, and Grace heard them all, her face twisted, lips trembling. She turned on the crowd, her voice breaking into shards. It's not true. I only wanted... But the words dissolved. No one cared for her explanation. In this society, reputation is currency, and hers had just collapsed like a market crash. I said nothing. There was nothing left for me to say. Instead, I turned toward the doors. Samuel began gathering the papers with precise, almost reverent hands. My steps were slow, deliberate, each footfall echoing across marble. I felt every eye follow me. The same man they had mocked for a torn suit now walked out, it cloaked in a victory they could never buy. And then behind me, her voice tore the silence apart. "Daddy, please don't leave me like this." Her cry cracked open, raw, stripped of polish, stripped of pride. It wasn't the voice she used to impress her wealthy in-laws. It was the voice of a desperate child, begging her father not to let go. I stopped at the threshold. My hand brushed against the heavy oak frame of the door. The instinct surged in me. To turn back, to gather her in my arms, to shield her from the wolves now circling. But revenge isn't about shielding. Revenge is about truth, and truth had already been unleashed. I stepped into the cool night. The muffled roar of scandal stayed locked inside that gilded cage of crystal and gold. Out here, the air was sharp, cold, honest. Above me, the stars hung over Huntsville like silent witnesses, the same stars I once pointed out to Grace. When she sat on my shoulders, her tiny finger tracing constellations I named for her. Back then, her laughter was pure. Back then, I believed nothing could sever us. But as the night air wrapped around me now, heavy with both triumph and sorrow, a single realization settled in my chest like stone. Sometimes victory does not bring peace. Sometimes victory clears the ground only for grief to grow. And I knew what waited for me beyond this night would demand more strength than revenge ever had. The days that followed felt like walking through the ashes of a fire I had set myself. Huntsville was no great metropolis, just a town small enough for whispers to spread faster than wildfire, and stubborn enough to hold on to them long after the embers cooled. Everywhere I went, I could feel it. At the cafe on Clinton Avenue, two men leaned over chipped mugs of coffee, murmuring about that Weston girl who betrayed her daddy. Their voices dipped when I walked by, but their eyes followed me, not with scorn anymore, but with a strange, uneasy respect. At church on Sunday, old friends clasped my hand tighter than usual. Some bowed their heads, whispering prayers under their breath. Others simply looked at me with that expression people wear when they can't decide if you're a cautionary tale or a hero. And at the lumber yard, my lumber yard, the air hummed with a different kind of energy. Men who had once feared losing their livelihoods worked with new vigor. They shook my hand, clapped my shoulder, their loyalty stronger than ever. The smell of sawdust and pine filled my lungs, and for the first time in years, it didn't smell like loss. It smelled like home, but Grace was nowhere. Samuel kept me updated in his careful, measured way. He said Leonard had moved out within a week, that the Westons had cut her off entirely, distancing themselves from her as though she were a contagion. The invitations, charity galas, luncheons, society gatherings, they stopped arriving. The grand world she had fought so hard to claw her way into had turned its back on her, and in that world, silence was the cruelest form of exile. 3 weeks later, one heavy Alabama evening, I sat on the porch in my old rocking chair. The cicadas sang their steady hymn into the night. The humid air smelled of pine sap and warm earth. My chair creaked, its rhythm as old and familiar as my own breath. That's when I heard it, the crunch of gravel in the driveway. I lifted my eyes, and there she was, Grace. She lingered at the edge of the porch light, as though afraid of stepping fully into it. Her once perfect hair was tangled, strands falling loose across her face. Her silk dress was wrinkled, clinging to her like it had been slept in. She looked worn thin, like a painting left too long in the rain. But her eyes were still the same green I remembered from when she was 5, running barefoot through the lumber yard, her laughter carried by the wind. "Daddy," her voice cracked, splintering into the night. I lost everything. The words clung to the air like smoke. My hands gripped the arms of the chair, the rough wood pressing against my palms. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence settle between us, the cicadas filling it with their endless song. Finally I asked, my voice low, worn, but sharp. "And what about me, Grace? What about when you let them take everything from me? When you stood by as they stripped me bare? When you laughed at me in front of them?" Her face crumpled, tears spilled, tracing streaks down her cheeks. She stepped closer, her shoulders trembling. I was wrong. I thought I was protecting myself, protecting us. I didn't realize. My voice cracked, brittle as dry timber snapping. Or didn't care. She flinched, and for a moment, even the cicadas seemed to falter, as if nature itself held its breath. Neither of us spoke. The porch light buzzed faintly, drawing moths that fluttered against the glass. Overhead the stars glimmered, silent witnesses to a bond broken long before this night. At last, I sighed. My chest felt heavy, as though the years themselves had settled inside it. "Grace, I can't give you back what you lost, and I can't pretend the hurt you caused didn't happen. But you're still my daughter. That will never change." Her eyes widened, as though she had expected me to banish her entirely. "But," I continued, my voice softer now, Trust is like this old chair I'm sitting in. Once the wood cracks, you can mend it, sand it down, glue it together, but it'll never be the same. The scar will always remain." Grace nodded slowly. Her tears fell freely, dripping onto the porch boards below. For the first time in years, She didn't look like the polished socialite she had fought to become. She looked small again, fragile, like the little girl who used to slip her tiny hand into mine when thunderstorms rattled the windows. I didn't rise. I didn't pull her into my arms. But I didn't send her away either. She lowered herself onto the porch steps, her back hunched, her gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the yard. The cicadas filled the silence, their song weaving through the night like a reminder that life carries on, no matter how jagged the breaks. And so we sat, father and daughter, not healed, not whole, but no longer enemies. Revenge had restored my land, my dignity, my name. But redemption? Redemption was something different. It wasn't something Samuel could file with a court. It wasn't sealed with a judge's stamp. It was fragile, uncertain, a path paved with years of patience, if it ever came at all. Still, as my rocking chair creaked and the Alabama night wrapped its arms around us, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a sliver of peace. Maybe legacy wasn't just about property deeds or the weight of a family name. Maybe it wasn't about the scars others left on you, but about the lessons you leave behind. Some betrayals can ruin fortunes, but forgiveness, even fragile, imperfect forgiveness, can save souls. And that night, as cicadas sang and stars watched from above, I prayed quietly that saving hers might one day save mine too.